Hello everybody, tonight we're working on Unit 5, which the topic for Unit 5 is Java Server Faces. So this is the first of the series of 3 technologies we're going to be looking at, where we're going to start transitioning some of our GUI programming skills away from operating system native development over to a web environment. And so just to be clear on what we're doing is we're looking at the first of a series of technologies that creates the web output of our Java programs. So like you've learned your PHP or ASP.NET coding, where you're doing server-side coding with those languages, here we're going to be using Java to do our server-side coding, and the web or the browser will be what the user interfaces with. What's fascinating about this approach is there's so many websites out there where this happens, and you guys are typically completely unaware, because who really gets to look at what's happening on the back end of any application? One application that is driven very heavily by Java on the back end is one that we're looking at on the screen right now, which is Blackboard. Blackboard is written around JSP predominantly, although it's really kind of a mix of technologies. But in the early days of Blackboard, I was always curious, how are they doing this? So I would right click and do investigations, and saw that that the Java was really the engine behind it. One of the beauties, of course, of server-side programming is that the users never get to see your code, unlike a lot of other front-facing technologies. All they will see is the resulting output that you're pushing to the browser. And the beauty of working with Java, of course, on the back end is Java is a full-blown compiled programming language that would reside on the server, and therefore, because of that, does require special types of servers to make it operate. So for example, on our Apollo web server, we don't have Java components loaded for a number of different reasons. The predominant reason for that is if you're going to run Java on a web server, you typically want to actually isolate that from the actual web server component, and it doesn't always sit well with other technologies. So if you're making the choice to have Java be your back-end programming language, usually you'll have a dedicated server, and usually that server will be running a technology called Tomcat, which has been historically known to be kind of a beast to configure and work nicely with other technologies. So as we work, what's going to happen is that we need to have a server-side component actually running on our local machines in order to make all the web stuff work. So if you've done work in PHP where you've loaded tools like WAMP or XAMPP or MAMP that runs natively on your local machine to drive the content, that's basically what we're going to be doing here. However, we're not independently installing these products. We're actually going to download a new IDE that will kind of bundle that all in and make it a little bit easier for us. The IDE that we are going to install is going to be Netbeans. So I have some little addendums that I put into the topic list for this unit, and I did get a couple of emails from, I always get those students that are kind of ambitious and want to work ahead, and they're all done with Unit 4, and they're like, well, where's Unit 5? I'm like, patience, young one, all in due time. And the reason for that is every time I teach this course, I always have to validate what the download instructions for Netbeans really are. Now, I do have some links in the course shell, and going back in it, maybe even in Unit 0 or 1, I had basically this listing. And today I was working on revising this just a little bit to update a couple of things. So the one thing that I did is, the old link that I had here for Netbeans, it used to take you to this page where you could select your versions. And while that was helpful, what's happened in the interim is Oracle no longer manages this product. So this used to be, kind of, for many developers, the go-to IDE for Java, because it was built by the people that built Java. So they always figured, so if I'm going to build Java applications, why not use the tool that the company developed for it? The beautiful thing about Netbeans is it does not only do Java. It can do PHP, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and really a number of other languages, including C, C++, etc. And it has a lot of stuff built into it, and there's some advantages to using this product over using Eclipse. In a professional development world, most developers that use or that develop in Java tend to use Eclipse because it is highly extensible and plug-inable. So like if you work in particular industries, there's people that write little modules for it, and Eclipse is just, you know, a little bit better in that capacity. But what's kind of neat about Netbeans is when you do go ahead and install it, if you have not done Java work on your machine before, it recognizes that and will go ahead and install the JRE and the JDK and all the prerequisites. And now I've been working with Netbeans for quite a while, and I do have it installed on my machine already. However, I've been kind of delaying this process, which I'm going to do tonight, which is actually installing a fresh version. And I kind of have done that by intent, because when you are working with a version that works, you're really reluctant to move to a newer version. So even when I'm running Eclipse, I'm like reluctant to download a new version, because the one I have works great. Why would I take the chance of screwing that up? However, we are several Java versions beyond where I am with my Netbeans. I think the Netbeans version that I have installed here is probably 8.1 or 8.2, so it's 8.2, and that was the last one that Oracle put out as an official version under their product umbrella. When Netbeans moved to version 9, subsequently version 10, and now 11, they gave the project over to the Apache Software Foundation. So if you click this one link here, notice how it pops to an Oracle page for a second, and then it says, oh, wait a second, go over to Apache. Yeah. So really I should probably update that link, but I kind of left it in there on purpose. So here you land on the page for getting Netbeans. Now here's the problem with this. They're assuming here a couple of things. First of all, they're assuming that you're already a high-end coder, and if you go ahead and let's say you choose one of these two, and let's talk about which one you choose, right? I mean, that's kind of a thing too, because you see two of them here are listed as downloadable, and they're both version 11. This is 11.0 and this is 11.2. Okay? 11.1. Yeah, whereas 11.1 is right. That's the answer, part of the question, really. And then if you just let's say you want to click one and choose one, and people who are more like stability focused will always choose the ones that have this added to it. What does that stand for? Right? Well, here's a great little acronym to know. LTS stands for long-term support, meaning this is considered a stable product version, not a beta, not like test versions or anything like that. And so if you want stability, you go with this one because this one's proven, and that's why it, they have LTS after it. It also indicates that they're offering support. If you go ahead and you click through and you want to do this, right, you're going to start getting to the point where downloading Apache, incubating, blah, 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 blah. And this word should trip your trigger right away too, right? Incubate. And then you go here and then you see, well, there's the source, there's the binaries, and the Java docs. Okay, so what is the source? Source code? Yeah, the actual source code that builds the product, folks. So they're saying, here's the code, download it, compile it yourself. All right? Okay? Hey, if you want to create your own version of Netbeans, go in there and hack the code a little bit, and you got your own version. And you know what? There are people that do that kind of stuff. It is an open source product. It always has been. The other thing is the binaries. All right. What is a binary? Yeah. What happens when you take source code and you compile it? Yeah, it turns it into binary code that only the computer can read, what we call machine code. Right? So that's actually the compiled version of it as a zip file. So you can just download the zip and unzip it. All right. Now I thought to myself as I was looking at this is just going to confuse people, and that's the last thing I want is to confuse people. And so my thought is, don't download any of those, any of the ones you see on that screen at all. Even though I have provided the links to everything, what I would prefer that you guys do is go back into the unit folder and take a look at the resources that I provided here. So the first thing that I did is I went around hunting to see if they had installers, right? So like it would install like a typical Windows program. And so I found this on the Apache site, this page, which takes us to version 11.1. And you can see here they have the binary, so the zipped version, you just unzip it and there it is and it runs. Now the other thing you should know about a version like that where the binaries are already, where it's already basically compiled, is that that's a portable version. You could take that version, put it on a stick, unzipped, plug in any machine, and you got a development environment. Right? Now that can be kind of problematic in some environments, but the truth is that's kind of cool too, because it doesn't embed itself into your registry, it doesn't create a start menu item or any of that kind of stuff. And so it gives you like kind of an alternative way to actually execute a piece of software. So that's still there as an option. Okay? And for some people, that is kind of the preferred way to work. The other thing that this page offers is they do have the installers for all the three major platforms. That would be Windows, Linux, and the Mac OS. Knowing that most of our students are using either PCs or Macs, I took it one step further. So this is what I did. Being kind of the geek that I am, if you download directly from the Apache org, they throttle the bandwidth of all the downloads. So if we're all in the classroom together and we all hit download at the same time, we're kind of like limited. It doesn't matter how fast your network speed is, you're limited to a certain download rate, and I don't know what they cap it at. I didn't really clock it, but it might be something like 300K a second or something like that. So the 300 or 500 meg download, whatever it happens to be, can take you 5, 10, 15 minutes of downloading. The other issue with that is if you, let's say, grab the zip version is going to take a really long time to unzip as well, because it's unzipping so many small files. And that's true with a lot of IDEs. So what I did is I actually downloaded both the Mac and the PC version, and I threw it up on Apollo, because I figured, you know what? Nothing's going to be faster than a server that's right down the hall. It's on the same network. So your download will probably be done in like 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds. And you know what? I have not installed this version on my machine, so guess what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to actually do that. I'm going to grab the Windows version right from here. You can see here's the download. All right, maybe not 10 seconds. I don't know, what was that, 5, 10 seconds? Yeah, 3 seconds for you, fantastic. All right, so, and that was the reason. And any of you that are at home watching the video and downloading at home, especially if you're not like on super fast internet, you guys are probably going to be, go get a cup of coffee or whatever and come back, basically. All right, I'm going to go ahead and do the install. And not that you guys really need hand-holding on installing an IDE, but there's a bunch of quirks we're going to run into. So how do I know that we're going to run into a bunch of quirks? Because I was just installing it on my Mac in the office because I wanted to test it, and I wanted to be sure that all the required tools and libraries are available, and if not, how you get those enabled. In the old days, Oracle had this one download page that I loved. It was basically all the versions of NetBeans listed on one page with a little matrix of all the tools, that, all the languages and stuff that was built in. And I thought that was really cool because, I'd show it to everybody, like you can get these custom ones, or you can just choose the one in the last column that does everything, and everything's already built in and added on, and you just download the zip, unzip it, and you're good to go. But unfortunately, we don't have that interface anymore, so we have to use one of these other options. So the installer is up on my screen. The installation size looks like about 600 meg. That's not too bad for an IDE, really, especially when you start to compare to like Visual Studio, which can take up to 100 gigs, depending on the libraries that you install. All right, I'm going to go ahead and click Next. Of course, you have to accept the license agreement. All right, choose your install location. I'm just going to go with the defaults here. I want you also to notice that on this particular screen, they do point to the JDK. And if you're like me, you may have more than one JDK available. Go with whatever it chooses as a default, because as consumers we can sometimes install more modern versions of the JDK, but those are the SE versions, the standard edition. And for any of the stuff that we're doing that requires database or other high-end server work, all require Enterprise Edition, which is still Java version 8, which is also one of the reasons why I never upgraded past NetBeans 8.2, because the EE version always matched up with whatever the NetBeans version was. The fact that they have NetBeans 11 matches up with the fact that they have standard edition Java version 11 out there. That's the mindset. All right, so let's go ahead and do install. I'm going to leave the check for updates installed. May as well make it as secure as possible. Get the latest tools at the same time. Now, once again, as this goes through its process of installing, I want you to keep in the back of your head a couple of different things. One is the fact that because we're installing it with an installer, it does embed into the registry. And I think that's generally a good thing. It will create start menu items for you. So I recommend this approach for both the Mac and the PC. I did try it out on my Mac prior, literally about 45 minutes before starting class here, because I realized, oh, I got this big old iMac and I got nothing. I don't have NetBeans on here. I may as well just throw it on here just so I have it. And the fact that if, let's say, you're doing this on a fresh machine from scratch, if you don't have the JDK, and like I said, and the JRE, it will go ahead and install those tools for you. Because you can't do any development work if you don't have a runtime environment, and you can't do it without the development kit. All right. So it's already at pushing 20% here. We're just going to let it do its thing. Most of what it's doing is it's unzipping a bunch of smaller files. So if you guys look at like the files that are popping up, all of them are jar, pack, gz files, which are Linux format zip files that it's unpacking. And you should also know this about Java as well. Whenever you see any Java file with a .jar extension, that's a jar file, right? And it stands for Java Archive, which is Java's own zip format for condensing files down. All right, so we're going to let this do its thing. I'm going to pause the video while it completes. You guys don't need to watch a progress bar for 5 minutes. So, all right, as you can see, the process did complete successfully, which included unpacking all the files, installing all the files, checking for updates, applying any updates if necessary, and then giving me this screen. Now, apparently it put an icon on my desktop. I'm not really sure that I see it, but I guess I do. I'm not usually a fan of keeping icons there, but I will launch from there for right now. It is important to note that I do have a pre-existing version of NetBeans on my machine, but it was one of the portable versions. So notice what it's doing now, and I kind of anticipated this. Isn't it funny that it pops up the screen right when I'm talking about it? So settings created by a previous version of the IDE were found on your system. Do you want to import them? I'm going to err on the side of saying no for a couple of different reasons, because if you guys are installing from scratch, I would rather mimic what you guys have going on than what I have going on. So I'm not going to import the settings. Chances are what it would do is it would import all the projects that I was doing last time predominantly, and maybe my screen layout to some degree. But I'm going to let it do its thing. This is kind of a snazzy new interface. It's kind of interesting to not see the Oracle logo on this. If you guys aren't familiar with the Apache organization, they are the ones that create the Apache web software, web server software, which drives a majority of internet traffic. All right, so here's the IDE up on the screen, up and running. Now, we will do some stuff inside here, but at this point, if we have this basically installed, we're just going to kind of leave it alone. All right, I'm going to jump into lecture mode for the chapter, and as we go, we're going to be prompted to do certain things, and then while we're doing that, we are going to have to do a couple little extra steps to make this work right. And I kind of want to do it as you guys might do it, rather than kind of like do it all up in advance and then come back to it and explain it later. So I'll kind of like do the process and explain why it's happening all at the same time. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to go into the chapter material and begin the lecture component of this. The one thing that I will tell you is that in this course, I've taught this a number of times, and so my videos are getting a little bit dated. So I have like all these pre-existing videos. I went through the process this week of uploading a lot of my transferred videos over to YouTube. So if you hover over all these now, they should all be YouTube links. I am planning on recording at least the lecture parts of this fresh, because I wasn't happy with the audio quality and the way I presented some of the things in the past. And they're 3-4 years old in some cases, some of these videos, so I think it's time to do some fresh ones. And those will appear here, and they will be marked separately. If you're using the 10th edition of the textbook, you will be on chapter 33, but we're using the 11th here in class, and that's chapter 39. The PDF version of that chapter is on the resources page, which you can get right here. And so go ahead and download that to your machine. So this is a web chapter that we're working from, and I think that's a pretty important distinction for a number of different reasons. Because if you pick up the book and you start, there's no chapter, it ends at 30. You go into like a panic mode. But this is one of those bonus chapters, and this author's done a really extensive job of covering just about every technology that circles around Java in his book. And I'm not sure why they make decisions to put certain things in certain places, but apparently they don't think that most Java programmers are web people, so all the web chapters are in the bonus areas. But that's okay, because that's what we're going to use. I'm going to start stepping through the chapter. I'm going to pull the tab off and separate it out just so I can alt-tab between applications. So to begin with, I'm just going to start reading through the chapter. I want you to notice the topics here. So we are going to be working with this technology called Java Server Faces. Once again, one of the 3 key technologies to use within Java interface in order to create web output for your programs. We are going to be focusing on Netbeans for a number of different reasons. Can I do this with Eclipse? You can, if you're so inclined. However, Eclipse tends to work better with the Tomcat web server, where our focus will be predominantly with Glassfish, simply because as a integrated web server, I think it just works a little bit more smoothly. And it tends to have less configuration issues. So I think that's pretty important. I know I've had students successfully do this work with Eclipse, also with IntelliJ. And all of those IDEs offer the support to do the work that we're doing in this chapter. So we're going to learn basically about what Java Server Faces is, how we build projects within this environment, how we create what we call managed beans, little Java beans as we call them, which are little micro programs that we include in other programs. And then we're going to kind of take some of our GUI skills, create an HTML interface with it, and then have that interact. Our grand goal here is not only are we going to build a web interface, folks, but we're going to also have it tie into our database, just like we did in the previous chapter. So we're really kind of taking some bold step forward here, not only creating web applications with the Java backend, but ones that tie into a database on top of it all. And I think that's a marvelous thing. All right, let's get into the material and start talking about how this technology works. The first thing that you guys are going to notice as we're building pages is, as web developers, you've learned the key web technologies already. So what are the key web languages? HTML, CSS, JavaScript, right? And all of those languages are perfectly valid inside what we're doing right now. The one difference that's pretty significant, though, is this. If you look at what they're doing here, you'll notice that they're highlighting XHTML. And if you guys aren't aware of this, and you should have learned this, I'm hoping, in your Web 1 class probably, but before there was HTML5 as a standard, the standard that preceded it was not, folks, not HTML4. It was XHTML 1.0 and 1.1. And there was actually a little bit of a battle between the standards as to what would follow in HTML5.1, but there is an XHTML 2.0 out there that never got approved as a standard. Now, let's talk about the history of that a little bit. Because, what's that?
They still use it?
Absolutely. Here's an example of where it's still used. What happens with XHTML, and the whole reason it existed, is prior to that point in time, the HTML standard was very loose. In other words, in order for browsers to allow for older web content to be displayed, they had to kind of let the rules be broken. Because like in the first versions of HTML, for example, we didn't use lowercase letters for tags, we used strictly uppercase letters for tags. And then when you created a paragraph, you didn't have to close it. You know, there was like weird little rules like that. Now, when it comes to coding software applications, looseness is absolutely not allowable. Like, think about like how Java works, right? If you forget a semicolon, or you forget that curly brace, or you have too many or too few, it can cause all sorts of problems. So they reverted back to the XML language. So if you guys, just Google XML, chances are the first hit's going to bring us to W3 Schools. In fact, let's just go there. But XML is kind of what we call the parent markup language for all markup languages. It's not the original one. The original one is what we call SGML, which was the one that they used in printing prepress back in the 80s. And then from there we built HTML that kind of followed it. But when they started discovering that HTML was not a good platform for application delivery, somebody came up with the idea is, well, we need a language that's extensible, that's strict, and follows a specific rule set that you can't break in order to create applications that can actually adhere to software development standards. Just like Java adheres to syntax standards, XML forced people into this format of a rigid, extensible markup language. So if you want to take a really quick look at what XML looks like, what's extensible about it is you can create your own tags, folks. You don't have to use the tags that pre-exist. And the way that the tags are built, anything that's open must be closed. There's no exceptions. If it doesn't have a closing tag, then it's self-closing. Vaughn?
I thought the main reason for HTML was to create a dynamic HTML language.
Yeah, well, that's for XHTML. I'm not quite there yet. I'm still on XML. So the question was, the thought was why. I guess we're going to wait. Why XHTML exists, and that was to allow for dynamic content to be enabled, and that's absolutely correct. So I don't know what it's trying to load there, but what you can see here just from the sample code that's on the page is that you can create your own tags, and the tags have meaning relative to the content, right? And now I'm hoping that sounds familiar with your HTML5 work, because with HTML5 the whole thing was we are moving into the era of the semantic web, where your HTML document provides the structure and the content and the meaning of the content, the semantic web. So they borrowed from XML this strictness and the ability to use extensibility. And yes, you can use your own custom tags in HTML if you guys did not know that. But what I'm hoping that they also show here is, they don't show the doc type for it, but you'll see that in just a moment. So XML has its own unique doc type. When HTML was being pushed forward as a standard and they moved to more modern versions, and they finally got up to HTML 4.0, and they would still have lots and lots of issues, they came out with a way of taking the strictness of XML and incorporating it into the HTML standard. So XML, since its creation, has been used subsequently to create all other markup languages. So this is the parent language to all markup languages, regardless of what it is. You want to make up your own markup language, you're going to write it in XML. It's kind of interesting. All right. You can use XML content directly. What it's most often used for is for higher-end application development and delivery of database content, believe it or not. But it's also used to help define all the other languages, their document types, and their namespaces. So we'll look at all that in just a moment. But I think it's kind of interesting. So when we moved to XHTML, what was fascinating about that is the strictness of XML was incorporated into the version. But unfortunately, it caused a lot of problems for developers in that a lot of developers did not know how to write according to standards because HTML was so loose. And so a lot of people would run into issues where, you know, they forget to close the tag, and it's like, why do I have to do it that way? I've always done it this way. And so with XHTML, what happened is they ended up coming up with actually different versions of it. So they have, in the doc type itself, it'll say strict or transitional. Ones that build applications that are rock solid, right, that adhere to the standards, use the strict standard, because the strict standard helps addendum technology. So for example, JavaScript, CSS, any back-end language, like what we're about to do, interact with the application more succinctly because it is, you know, it knows it's following the rule set and doesn't have to accommodate for variances in what coders are doing. When you use the strict standard, you have to follow the rules. The transitional standard allows for some flexibility. But it was that strictness that allowed us to move from the old school HTML that we knew back in like the 90s into like the era of Web 2.0 in the 2000s and the teens, where we were able to really put back-end languages behind things and create really powerful web applications with significant interactivity regardless of the back-end language. So that's kind of the why here. So if you're wondering, why are we reverting to the XHTML standard, that's the why. And what you're going to see here is as we create stuff with JSF, you're going to see an XML doc type at the top, you're going to see an XHTML doc type at the top, and a definition of various namespaces relative to the technology we're using in our program. All right? The beauty is that all the HTML5 stuff works perfectly inside of XHTML, provided you follow the strict standards of XHTML. So you cannot have a line break without a self-closing tag in it, for example. So a BR tag becomes BR space /. That's just an example. Okay. We will be using Netbeans. You can see here when they wrote the book, they were working on the enterprise editions. You must use the enterprise edition to do web work. So the JDK that we're using is going to be version 8. Okay, just so you know. All right. So how do we actually build an application that does this? They're going to give us some step-by-steps here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow these step-by-steps and get a project going, and then this will kind of lead us into configuring our Netbeans a little bit farther. Okay. So I'm doing this with intent. So here's how you create a JSF project. We're just going to follow these steps. So we're going to go into our IDE, which hopefully is still running. I'm going to go ahead and close the start page if you don't mind. Yes, you can create a new project right from the screen, but I don't want to do that. I want to click the little X up here and just close that start page and just get it out of the way. So we're going to start with a blank screen. Don't worry about learning the interface quite yet. Let's just get a project going, and then you'll see how it's really not that much different than Eclipse and its layout or most IDEs. So the first thing we'll do is go up to the File menu and create a new project. All right, you're going to get this interface that pops up, and you know what? Oh my God, there's a lot of options here. Okay, and it is a little bit overwhelming. And to boot, they have all these other little provisions that happen inside here. So the one thing that you might think of right off the bat is, well, here's the web one, or here's the HTML5, let's go. Wrong answer, right? That's if you just want to build a standard web page, right? That's what you'll choose. Notice they got PHP is built in there too. Great. But notice that they have Java with actually several different back-end components already attached to it. And they do have little lookup tools where you can come up here and type in a search and look for the particular thing that you're looking for. But this is very not unlike if you jump into Visual Studio, for example, and you're confronted with like this whole myriad of like project choices that you can build from, and it's all about choosing the right one. Let's go back to the instructions real quick and see what it says. File, new project, and then choose Java Web. Now this is written around version 7, and the first thing you're going to notice here is I don't see Java Web here anywhere, and I do see web application here, but is that the right one, right? You do. Yeah, you have one that says Java Web. Where do you see that?
I'm in the categories.
Yeah, which category are you in? You see it listed
Java.
here?
Yeah. It's in
Does anybody else have it listed there?
Under Java and?
Yeah, well that's exactly correct. So it is there. It's just a matter of where you're looking.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
It's right here.
So Vaughn's got it in a different place.
Yeah.
So I got to come over and see. And this is, oh, you're using the old version of Netbeans, no wonder.
Oh.
Yeah, you're using 8.2, that's fine. 8.2 will work great.
Okay.
So no problem at all. But with this version, you have to know where to look. So the one that we do want to use is Java Web. But I also want to show you that regardless of which like back-end systems you're using with this, and they have a lot of open source libraries that you can select from. Like for example, you can do JavaFX from this interface too, but notice how you can also do JavaFX over here with Maven. So this is part of the complication. So what we're going to work on right now, folks, is we are going to work on Java Web. And then you notice by default on the right-hand side, web application is selected. All right, so those are our selections. Oops, I didn't mean to change off of that. So if you have that selected on both sides, go ahead and click Next. All right. Now, notice what it's doing. It says Finding Feature. All right, and notice it says, in order to use this functionality, support for Java Web and EE must be activated. So the one thing I loved about the pre-built version, the one that Vaughn's actually using, is all this stuff was already installed and activated right off the bat. So we don't have a choice here. If we want to do this work, we have to download and activate. So this is kind of a newer thing here. So go ahead and click Download and Activate and get that process started. All right. And then you're going to get install screens for all the separate products that are being added. So first thing we're adding is the Oracle JavaScript Parser Implementation 1.0. I guess I got to install that. Have to accept the license agreement, of course, like you have a choice. Right? Being a little cynical there, but you know, that's how it goes. And now we're kind of waiting for it to catch up. So now it's doing some other additional library here. We'll let it do that work too. Seems to be going pretty quick. You know, like I said, I did this earlier on my Mac, and it didn't take too long to add these components. I did run into a couple of quirks. I'm really curious to see if it's the same on a PC relative to a Mac, but so far it's almost identical. One of the quirks that I ran into was this one right here. This screen stayed blank for a while, so I want to see if it. You guys like stuck on this one too? Yeah, that's exactly the strategy I use too. I waited a little while patiently. I mean, I seem like my mouse is like kind of flashing, which to me indicates it's probably doing something in the background. All right, but then you know, here's my impatience. I'm going back. I'm like, I'm not waiting, so I'm going forward, and now hopefully it's going to find the features because we installed them, right? But I think that what it's going to do, and notice what it's doing now, it says activating Java Web and EE. So I think they just have a programming error in this interface that needs to be corrected. So like maybe version 11.2 fix that, you know. But right now it's activating Java Web and the Enterprise Edition components, which we need for database work and a lot of GUI stuff. So let's be patient. as we can.
I'm switching to 11.1. Yes,
All right. As you can see, this has completed that process finally. And I'm going to jump back over to the instructions now. And we're still on step 1, folks, by the way. All right. In the new web application dialog box, enter and select the following fields as shown. So we're going to create JSF2 demo. And really, you can call it whatever you want, but that's what the author is calling it. So let's go ahead and do that. And then they kind of suggest a project location. So was it JSF2 demo? And I am not going to put it in my documents folder. Sorry, that's not how I work. I'm going to put it in my my Google Drive, wherever the heck that is, which is my G drive on this machine. And then I have folders created for all of my courses. And of course, I do have a Java 2019 somewhere. Oh yeah, thank you. No wonder I can't find the folder. That's why you actually have to read the screen, right? We're in the Java 2 class. All right, so we're going to choose that folder as our workspace. Let me go ahead and open that. And you notice that what it does is it will create a subfolder with the project name. All right, so that's where I'm choosing to put mine. You put yours wherever makes sense for you. I'm a big believer in, whenever you're doing coding work, store your source code in the cloud so you don't lose your source code. All right, go ahead and click next. And now we have to take our next step. So let's go back to the instructions. And you guys know why they, like programming books, always suggest that you create stuff off the root of the C drive? Because everybody's got a C drive, right? At least Windows people. All right, so that way they can always give you a folder location that makes sense. All right, so they are asking us here to choose the Glassfish web server and Java EE version 7. We're going to make slightly different choices, just so you know. All right, the first thing we're going to do is add a server, and I can see that, well, I don't have any declared that I can choose from, so I have to click the add button. I am going to go with Glassfish because from my experiences for coursework, it's a much more lightweight than Tomcat, easier to work with, and just general rule of thumb is it just works. Tomcat has issues in my mind. Not that it's not possible to make it work. In fact, really kind of interesting side note, if you already have XAMPP installed in your machine, you'll notice that who makes Tomcat? Apache, the same people that now do this product, but I think it's interesting that it still has Glassfish in there. If you have XAMPP, all you have to do is actually point to the executable file for Tomcat that's already included with XAMPP, and it will work. But I still prefer to use this product. That's just kind of a helpful thing to know. I'm going to click next, and then notice what it says here, installation location. So what it's going to do is it's going to create a folder on your machine where it's going to deploy that stuff to. And we are in a local domain, so we're running on a local machine. I'm just going to go with the default. You can see that it's working off of a newer version. In my mindset, you should use the newer version on this no matter what. You do have to click the little box because you're accepting the license agreement and you're downloading it once again and installing it kind of on the fly. So this is 112 megs basically. So we're just kind of waiting for this to do all its downloading and installing. So I may end up just doing a little bit of a pause on the video like right now. Okay, as you guys can see, it finished to download in the install, and I'm going to go ahead and click next. All right, and then it jumps us over to this screen. Now what this is we are actually naming our server instance for Glassfish on our local machine. All right, So this is basically creating a secondary web server on your machine. Depending on what other software you have installed, it might claim a different HTTP port than what's listed here. But I want you to notice that it is not port 80. You guys catching that?
Yeah.
It's port 8080. All right, so that's kind of important. The other thing that I would suggest that you do, if you want, is you could put a username and password on this. In my installation on my Mac, I kind of opted out and I didn't put in a username or password. And I'm not sure if that's good or bad, frankly. And I'm not trying to make a judgment on it, but you know what? I'm not really sure, so I'm going to actually click Help. And I'm not sure if that's a wise choice in itself, but, you know, because I'm clicking it, nothing's happening. All right, well, apparently let's not click Help. I'm going to actually skip the username and password. I'm just not going to put them in. I don't plan on like leaving my web server running and somebody hacking it. I'm just going to be launching a project, testing it, and then shutting it down right away. So, but if you wanted to be safe, you would set up a username and password, and if you do, make sure it's something you remember so that you're not locked out of it later. Okay? Yeah, I'm not really sure what goes in Target. It could be what the Target URL is. That would be my guess. So what's your Target folder? I'm leaving it all undone right now. If there's an issue, we're going to have to come back in and reconfigure it. So we'll find out as we go. I'm trying. I went with the default. It's just you're naming the instance of the server, which implies that you can have multiple instances running. So that's even like a weirder thing to think about. So I could have multiple web server softwares running on the same machine. Absolutely. It's just they can just direct it to different ports. All right. So now we're at a screen that actually will make sense to us. It will come back, but here it is. Apparently, it was recording the whole time, so I didn't say anything too weird. All right. But you can see that the server is now selected, and that Java EE version 8 is selected because it's required. That's the highest level of the EE software that's available currently. So that's what we're using. All right. The context path is based on the name of the project, and we're just leaving that just the way it is. Let's go to the instruction set. So we basically completed step 2 at this point. And I think we're at this step here where we're choosing the name and location perhaps. So let's click next and see if that's correct. We do want to choose Java Server Faces because that is the framework that we're using. If it lets me actually select it, there it is. It was being very hesitant, by the way. It was actually clicking. There are no real changes that we need to make here. And I'm just checking the screens, in the book, right? So that's the choices that we make. And then we're actually ready to click Finish and proceed. So go ahead and click Finish. And now it's finally building out our project. So it's been a little bit of a process because this is the first time we're doing it. Obviously, all the stuff that we installed is not going to be a relevant step on subsequent, project builds. And you can see it shows a little progress bar and what it's doing there. It says adding selected frameworks. And just being patient. There we go. Now the moment it actually launches, you're going to start to see things on the screen that should look, I'm hoping, somewhat familiar. All right, so on the left-hand side, we have something that's really similar to what we would see in Eclipse, and that is basically a project window where we have a list of assets. And I'm going ahead and I'm expanding that right away, and I want to just show you that building a Java web application with Java Server Faces kind of creates certain things that are pretty standard. The first thing that you're going to notice is the name of the project at the top. Then you're going to have one folder or project branch or whatever you want to call it that's going to hold the web pages. And you can see in the code window right now And I'm trying to do a zoom on that, and apparently I'm going to have to bump up my font size manually. So if you guys bear with me here a second, it's been a while since I've done this in Netbeans. But I'm going to change my font size to something bigger than a 13, and because I'm up on screen, I'm trying to use something that I think you guys can actually see. Is that a little better, or should I go even a little bigger? You guys think that's all right? I worry about the people that are watching this online. All right, so I'm actually going to go up like one more size. As obnoxious as that seems, you definitely can read that, right? That's much better. It's a little, like, you wouldn't work this way, but you know what? Maybe if you're older like me, maybe you would. All right, so right away, the first thing that it does, the page that it pops up on the screen for you, is the default index page. And I want you to notice right here, the index.xhtml. So it does have a different file extension connected to it. Yeah. And as you guys learn other back-end languages, like, so for example, if you're working with .NET and you're building stuff with C# as a back-end, you'll have pages that are CS_HTML, for example. Notice the doc types, and I think that that's a kind of a big takeaway here, is first of all, the top doc type is XML. Yeah. XML only has one doc type. There were never more than one version of it. I think there's, I should correct myself, I think there's a 1.1 version too, but everybody pretty much uses version 1.0. And then the encoding is included right in the doc type declaration at the top as UTF-8, which is pretty standard for most web languages. The interesting thing is that we have a secondary doc type in the mix here. Yeah. And what I want to do right now is I actually want to turn on word wrap, and I'm trying to remember how to do this in NetBeans. Isn't that pathetic, right? I guess I probably have to go back to the tools menu and try to find it. I'm guessing it would be here. If somebody finds it faster than me, please call it out. Word wrap. Line wrap, right here, yeah. Yeah. Said okay. Let's see if it actually works. All right, well, it did it. So it's just matching up to my screen. But I want you to take a look at that doc type now for XHTML, how complicated it is, and why, when we came out with HTML5, they switched it to just be this. Yeah. Because how much simpler is that? It's significantly simpler. And really, the truth is that no matter how memorizable you are, or whatever, like how photographic your memory is, this is not something you memorize typically, but it really does point specifically to a location on the web that actually has a DTD document. And that's important for XML files because that DTD stands for doc type definition. And what that document contains in an XML format is a listing of all the requirements for the document. It's specified what the rules are that are being followed. The other interesting thing here is the addition of an XML namespace. And I want you to notice that there's not one, but there's two. So in the old days when we would do XHTML documents, we would have to also include in the HTML tag this little tidbit that said XML namespace, point to w3.org, and the definition for XHTML. That was required as well. Notice that there's a secondary namespace here, and more importantly, the little piece that follows it with a :H And that does not point to W3. That actually points over to, the Java people, their namespace. So they have actually a separate location where they keep a namespace for JFS documents building HTML pages. That's required as well. And that little :h extension then allows us to use some of the custom HTML tags that were developed for working with Java server faces. Now the question I always get from students is this: why would I use these funky ones that they look like they have the same names as regular HTML tags, but just have a little prefix of H:? Why would I use these? Could I just use the regular tags? The answer is this: yes, you can. But the moment you do that, you lose programmatic control over the tags. So what this is telling you is that you have the capability to manipulate the tags with code in the browser. Now the net outcome of these special tags is, yes, it creates a head tag for the HTML document. So if I actually run the page and look at the output code, it's not going to have H:head in it. It's going to just be a head tag. The difference is the programmatic control of those tags, and that's really kind of the important takeaway here. The body also has that, but you know what? We could already go ahead and run this program, but what they want us really to do is to take a look at the structure of it and what it looks like. And you notice, the page is all listed there just in the way that we talk about. The author does go through and kind of explains all the ramifications of how this works. They make a little bit of kind of a naive assumption that maybe you're coming into this without knowing any HTML, and I would highly doubt that you would be doing this work if you're in that category. Let's go ahead and actually run this now. And Netbeans, just like Eclipse, has a play button. But the difference here is when I hit that button, it's going to fire up the internal web server and get it running. So this is going to trigger Glassfish running. We will get an output window at the bottom if you watch. And you see here it's got a little thing that it's trying to do something. So we're just right now patiently waiting for something to happen.
Glassfish still looking at these
yeah, you need to switch your JDKs. So Vaughn is getting a message saying that you can't start Glassfish with JDK 10 because keep in mind we're doing EE programming, so you have to use the JDK version 8 and the EE version of it, which is the Enterprise Edition. If you notice at the bottom here, there's 3 tabs that'll pop up. So one is the run of the actual product, any database process that's happening in the background that's on issue right now. But the 3rd tab shows the progress on the Glassfish server. So the Glassfish server is running right now. And you might get a couple little messages. I don't want you to freak out. Like you see like a warning there. There's nothing wrong going on. It's recognizing that it's running on a local machine is what it's recognizing. So we're just letting this run. It takes a little time on first launch. So please be patient as you do this. Yeah, somebody's noticing that you can push your thing up directly to an Android device through this interface too. Yes, you can. All right, one step at a time. Let's just get a page to load first, and then we'll worry about pushing it to an Android device. All right. So this is saying that it blocked some features here. All right, whatever. Yeah, and that, you know what? Frankly, I'm not sure what browser it's going to launch into because I didn't select it.
I think the default is Internet Explorer.
Yeah, it could be Internet Explorer, which should be interesting. I can't remember the last time I've run it. So now, what you're seeing in the background here is the server log for Glassfish server, and there's a process to starting this. So you see, you're not just like launching a, it's like boom, there's your web page. there's a server-side component that has to run, because that server-side component has to like make all the Java stuff work. So even though we didn't write really any Java code here, we're still using Java code just by virtue of the doc type declaration. And it's not going to be anything fancy here, folks. It's just going to say hello from faceless, right? How do we know that that's what it's going to do? Because that's what it says right here. You know, in plain text. They don't even have it inside of tags. So if you want, you could put, you know, H1 tags around it, or put it in a paragraph, or whatever HTML you want to put in here, you could do. It's not really a big deal. If you do want to change what you're outputting to, I'm trying to remember, oh yeah, right here, right, the default browser. You might want to switch it, and notice this is the IDE's default, not your system default, and my default tends to be Chrome, so that's what I'm going to choose. And this is where Nathan noticed that Android device, Android emulator, yeah, if you have those tools installed, yes, absolutely.
So I have the option to do Chrome or Chrome with Netbeans connector. What would be the difference,
You know, I'm not sure what the Netbeans connector is. I think that might be the result of you having some plugin inside of Chrome that allows you to push to it that way. But I'm going to choose Chrome as my default from here on in, or Firefox. Usually I use one of those two. All right, next task that we're going to perform here is moving on through the chapter. So we're kind of stepping through the chapter and we're following their examples is what we're doing. All right, so we're going to move on to this little thing here. We're going to create this little time bean demo. All right, so inside the project, you know, and I'm going to actually move this off to the other screen now like I normally do. And try not to make it full screen, but it seems to want to go full screen. All right, that's better. All right, and I'm going to jump back over to Netbeans and perform the steps. So step 1 here, and this is page 6 of chapter 39. It says right-click the project node, which is JSF Demo 2, choose New, and then what we want to put in here is a new JSF managed bean. And I want you to notice that most likely that's not going to be in your list, right? So this is kind of like a predetermined list of what they think, you know, you're going to use most often. So we have to actually go to other to find it. And so this is where you go searching a little bit. So you guys know what technology we're using, right? Yeah, so that makes it a little bit easier to narrow it down, or you would think it makes it a little easier to narrow it down. But I'm not seeing, like under Java server faces, that there's a managed bean anywhere in this list. So I'm actually going to come back here and just scroll down. And once again, I'm not seeing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start a search. And I'm going to type in what the book has, JSF managed bean. And here's the problem. It's not coming up at all. All right, what if we strike the JSF Yeah, I'm not liking the way that the search is working, because I think maybe it's working, but maybe it's not. So I think what I'm going to type is bean and see what it finds. You know, this is kind of like a really kind of goofy way to do this. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. This is what happens. We switch like versions of IDEs, and now we're hunting. So I'm actually going to go category by category. And my students are doing the same here in the classroom, so it's not that we're dumb, it's just that this seems like the only way that we can proceed. So hey, that's what we're doing.
Maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah, kind of a combination. Now, you know, there is this JSF CDI bean, and you know that might end up being what we end up using. But I'm just clicking through. I know it's not going to be in some of these. Oh, okay, so Right, but these are enterprise level ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're totally searching now.
Inform?
I don't know, Java Beans component. You know what? We may
Other and the other.
say that one more time.
There's an other within our selection of other.
There's an other within the other?
Yeah. See?
Yeah, no doubt. There's an other just in case you don't find what you're looking for.
In other.
But notice like all the different types of files that you can create here. That's pretty powerful, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. All right, so I have a little bit of an issue now with this because it's not finding it really quickly. So here's kind of my thinking. We're going to go ahead and just kind of guess, all right? My gut feeling tells me that I should probably choose this.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, because we are working with Java server faces, right?
yeah.
So we want one that's going to work with. So I'm going to choose JSF CDI bean, not knowing if it's right. So I'm just stating that up front. But you know, generally what it's creating is a Java file. And phew, you know what? That screen looks familiar. So that we're probably in the right place. So, and notice, isn't that fascinating? When I click next, what does it say up top here? New JSF managed bean. We made the right choice, right? Aren't we lucky, right? Yeah. That's why sometimes you're better off sticking with the old versions of stuff. All right, so they want us to give this a class name, and what the author suggests is that we call it time bean. And then it's going to, if you haven't declared a package name, it's going to suggest that we use the project name JSF2 demo. All right, it's going to put it in our folder. The only other thing that we have to change here is we need to switch the scope from dependent to request. Well, that changes the scope of how we're doing the work. So in other words, relative to what the application is doing on the screen. So this one is going to be requesting information from the system somehow. And most of the stuff that we're going to do is generally going to be request scoped or application scoped by rule. I mean, just by, you know, relative to the kind of stuff that we're doing. Once you have those selections made, go ahead and click Finish. And what it's going to do is it's going to build out a brand new Java file for us. And so here's where kind of the magic starts to come into play. In the background, we are now building a Java programming file, like we have all along, that's going to be added to this project and is going to work concurrently with that front-end HTML page to create our program. So let's give it a chance to do its work patiently as we can, which these days feels like it's not very patient, but you know, that's how it goes. All right, and it does open the file. All right, so this is looks very similar to what we have in the book, thankfully. Let's take a look at what it created. I'm going to move this output window out of the way. And so we now have down here, and notice that we have new files with a new folder all placed underneath a separate branch of the project called source packages.
How does it know our name?
How does it know your name? What it puts your name into your project?
Yeah.
C drive.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That
It-
makes sense.
It could
Yeah.
be pulling your user information in from your Windows account.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kinda creepy.
Right.
I'm pretty sure if I go here and go to, you know, pull up user information, or wow, I can't even do that. All right.
You need to get a Frankie.
Yeah. There we go. But you know, it pulls in your account name basically that you have for Windows. So my computer's being very sluggish right now, by the way. Maybe if I turn on my Blackboard broadcast, or turn it off, I should say. All right. So as you start looking through this file, just take a look. So for example, The first thing that it's pointing out is that we're part of a package. We did name the package, so we chose to actually do that. You could leave it blank, right? And that just bundles files together is all that does. The next thing that's here, oh, well this one's giving me an error which I'm not liking. Let's not worry about that right now. It doesn't necessarily pose a problem. It indicates the request scope that we designated, but notice how that's also placed here. Yeah. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that we put in this other directive here saying that we're naming this bean by an alternate name that we can refer to it as. Notice time bean. Notice it's a lowercase t. Yeah. It does create a class, and it does create a constructor. These are kind of just typical things that you do in a Java program. Now we're going to interject our code, folks. So let's go ahead and move on to the next instruction set here. So I'm looking at the book code right now, and what they'd like us to do is to create a new method inside here. So I'm just going to add it to the bottom, and it's going to go like this. Public string, that's the type we're returning, and then we're naming this getTime. So just a new method here. Put in our curly brackets. Now you guys will have a little bit of discomfort here because you're coming from Eclipse into a new IDE, and it's got a different way of kind of interacting with the user. So kind of go with it. In an ideal world, the IntelliSense would be kicking in a lot faster than this, but I see that finally as I slow down my typing, it's starting to help me out. And then we're going to convert that to a string. So basically what we're doing here, it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. We are going to pull the date from the system clock and convert it to a string inside this Java program. So that's what this Java program is doing. I'm going to go ahead and save it. All right. Next thing that we're going to do, moving down to the next thing, is we are going to create a new XHTML file. So we're going to come up here, once again, to the root of the project, choose New, and then we want to create a JSF page. So once again, I'm not really seeing that here, but you notice how the bean is now part of our list. Thank you. All right. So we're going to come back here to Java Server Faces, and we're going to choose Page, and then we're going to say Next. Yep. They want us to call this current time. And then I'm looking at some of their other instructions here. I'm kind of looking at their example screens. Okay. Let's go ahead and make sure that facelets is also suggested. Notice I do have an option here for JSP. We're going with the modern syntax here on this one. Go ahead, once you're all set here, folks, go ahead and click Finish. And then you can see you have a brand new XHTML document there to work with. We're going to add a little bit of code to this. So inside the body section, the first thing that we'll do is we'll add the code from the book. And I'm just copying this right from the PDF, by the way. And then in place of hello from facelets, we're going to say, nope, that's not what I was putting in there. That's my friend's address. Not what you guys want to see. I guess I'm just going to type it. All right. Current time is, and then notice what we're doing now. Hash mark, curly brackets, inside the curlies, we are calling that named instance, and then we're calling a method within it. And I want you to notice that we're not using the exact terminology that exists in the Java file. This is kind of fascinating. So TimeBean is the name that we gave the bean, this little Java program. Time is going to call this method, but notice it's a get time formally. So I could actually say get time in place of that.
Instead of TimeBean.time?
Yeah. But I can also, it's intelligent enough to kind of work around that, and it just assumes that one to be the case. So it's just going to call that particular one. And that's kind of one of the little quirks of JSF, if you want to think of it that way. So make sure you make those changes to the code. The next thing that we're going to add is a meta tag up at the top. And I should actually start with a bracket. So let's put it in meta. And then we're going to do this. HTTP-equiv. And I want you to notice this little command. And this is probably something you did not learn in your HTML class. Right? This is a meta tag that allows you to refresh your browser automatically, right? The book is suggesting that we put in 60 seconds. I don't want to wait that long. I'm just telling you right now, I'm going with 10 because that makes for a boring video to wait for all that to happen. And then because we're working with XHTML, notice I try to close my meta tag like I would in HTML5 by just putting a bracket in, and notice what the IDE did. It says, you're in XHTML, folks. You got to actually close that tag like this. The other option, you can use the self-closing approach, which is like this. That will work just fine too. But every tag that's open must be closed in XHTML. It's just the rule, otherwise the applications do not operate. Right. The other thing that's interesting is, I'm trying to like point out here what the options are. I could, in place of time, actually type out get time, the actual method call, and you might actually prefer to do it that way because you're not comfortable with just doing time. But it will figure it out on its own. But any of the JSF expressions that are embedded are prefaced with the hash mark and then put inside curly brackets, and then what this will do is it'll go to the source folder, it will look for the file, it'll find the method, and then execute it. Alright, so now comes the fun part. Let's go ahead and save all of this work. I do have some concerns, frankly, because I do have the TimeBean with flagging me red here, and that's usually a stop error. But it does say Alt-Enter to show hints. That sounds kind of like what Eclipse does, right? You know what? Let's do Alt-Enter. Let's see what it says. Yeah. How about Control Space? Does that work here? Not exactly. Maybe if I did Alt-Enter. The package doesn't exist.
Did we go to JSF to demo.inject.name?
What are you saying, Nathan?
Because it's asking for a package. Is it referring to the JSF2 demo package?
Oh. No, it's not finding the library is what it's telling us.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of an issue. And the part that's the issue is basically this. So what they're doing, this is the piece that allows the named version of it to work. I'm going to actually go ahead and hit the run button and let it try to compile and then throw an output message, right? It says one or more projects were compiled with errors. So it's running. Do you want to run anyway? And you know what? I really don't want to do that. I want to actually see what the error is. So let's see if we can figure it out. Is anybody getting the Alt-Enter to work for them?
Every time I hit Alt-Enter, it just says package.
Yeah. All right. Let's see if we can figure out how to fix it.
Is that a, should that, that,
All right, so we're doing a little research, and of course we're on Stack Overflow. And I think I'm going to follow one of the suggestions I see here. All right, so I'm gonna try this.
Click library.
Yeah, so right-click libraries, add library, and it said,
The EE6.
yeah, but we're on EE8.
Right.
Yeah, and then do we want the web API? Sure. Add library, let's see if that fixes it.
It's not going to break it. We're just adding a library.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. It's not going to break anything, but you know what? It fixed it.
Okay.
All right.
Bingo.
So that's the fix, folks. I'm glad it was the first thing we tried. Makes it a little less frustrating. All right. So at this point, we're going to come here and launch off of this particular file.
Right.
And if you want to make sure that that's the case, you might want to actually go to your project window on the side and actually do run file from here, so you're not running the main one. So let's choose that. Now the interesting thing is I never shut off the Glassfish server. So right now I don't know if this is a, all right, let's try this again. Let's just hit run from here. See what Glassfish is doing. All right, so it put me, look what it did though, right? It put me on the other page. So how do I bring up the other file? Well, I can just type current time.xhtml and hopefully it works. But you know what? Here's what's happening. It's not working. What should be popping up in the browser window is the time being pulled up from the system. So this is failing, folks. It shouldn't come up in plain text like that. Let's go ahead and close this and see if we can figure out how to fix that.
Get time instead of time.
Yeah. Let's go and look at our code and see if we're throwing any errors anywhere. This says build successful,
Right.
right? Here's the next thing I'm going to do is the Glassfish server might not, folks, might not have compiled the code. Are you hearing me? For that Java file, because it was still running from the last time I built. So notice how the Glassfish server has in the sidebar here little buttons,
Yeah.
and if you hover over them, there's stop, restart, refresh. I'm going to actually stop the server. Okay, now it's stopped because you see the red button went away, and now I'm going to hit, well actually I'm just going to run the project again. So I'm just going to let it build. Now every time I run that play button up at the top, it compiles the code, right? And then my thinking is this, that Glassfish, the reason it just put the text on the screen is because it wasn't running the compiled version of the code. All right, and of course we have this little firewall thing here, but we're not too worried about that locally. All right, this is running in the background. Notice it's starting the Glassfish server. It says it's running. Incrementally deploying, build successful. That's a good sign. See what Glassfish is doing in the background. And for all I know, it's up in the browser already. Oh, I do have something on my second screen here. I guess I just didn't even notice it. I'm typing in the correct URL, pressing enter, and I'm still getting the same thing. So I really don't know if this is actually running correctly. So this is a horrible fail here so far. Yeah, isn't that awesome? When stuff doesn't work. That's one of those reasons why I always go back to the old versions of these products, because they work.
Right.
So one more time, I'm going to stop it, I'm stopping the Glassfish server on purpose, and then I'm going to take one additional step here. So we're going to let this complete.
Closing out all my Chrome pages.
Yeah, that's not. It's actually not a bad idea because that's a great point, Nathan. Because we also have the issue that the browser caches content, and we're not always doing a hard refresh.
Yep.
All right, so here's my next little strategy. I'm going to come up to the root of the project, and some of you might already be familiar with this technique. But sometimes when you run into issues like that are really weird like this, and everything else seems to be functionally okay, sometimes what's really going on is you have variables stuck in memory a certain way. So sometimes if you do a clean and build, this will actually clear out memory of all the built versions of whatever was sitting there, and then rebuild or recompile all the code. And that's without launching Glassfish. So then we look down here, and I see it said build successful, right? There's no issues with it. So I'm assuming it worked. That's my assumption here. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and relaunch the project, and maybe this time it will work the way that we want. I'm kind of expecting that it's going to jump up on screen number 2 again, so I'm kind of watching over there. And the other thing I'm guessing is that because I didn't run it directly from the file, and I also have this concern that maybe this needs to be enabled. Yeah, so maybe what's happening is, you notice what it's trying to communicate with? The JDK, right? So maybe it's not allowing the code to run and push to the browser. So we might actually have to go in there, and here's my little strategy. You're going to copy it right from there. Did you guys know that you can do that? All right, so the facelets page came up just fine. Let's try current time again. Okay, it's doing the same thing. So just in case you guys are having this issue too, so I'm thinking now it is the firewall. So let's try adjusting Windows firewall. I'm just on the search right off the start menu. I'm typing Windows firewall. I'm going to click on allow app through the firewall. So I'm going to cancel this window. You have to be an administrator on your machine to be able to do this, by the way. You might not be able to. You might have to wait till you get home.
You might be able to make yourself.
Yeah, so I'm going to click allow another app. And remember I copied the whole path of it? See, there was a strategy there. Oh, but it didn't retain it. Oh, isn't that horrible? Yeah, it won't let me paste it. All right. I know where it's located. That's okay. I'm not freaking out. I know it's in my C drive, under Program Files, Java, the JDK, in the bin folder, and then Java exe. So I'm going to go ahead and allow that. All right. We're going to say network types, private and public. That's fine. And we're going to click Add.
So what did you do after you went to the bin folder?
After I went to the bin folder?
Yeah. What was the path you chose?
Well, it's Java, Program Files, Java, the JDK, the bin, and then Java.
Okay.
But you notice that what it did, when I selected that and I chose Add, it says it's already in the list of exceptions.
Oh, mine didn't. Mine added it.
Yeah.
Make it public?
Yeah, so adding it is irrelevant for me.
Okay.
And I suppose the thing you can do is you can come in here
Yeah, just search it.
and make sure. But I see that I have 2 different versions.
Yeah, that's weird.
That is a little weird. The other thing I'm going to search for here is perhaps is there any other related, like I'm looking for like Glassfish and anything else that might be like Java related, or Netbeans. That could be Netbeans IDE is enabled. I see some stuff in here I want to turn off. That's kind of a separate issue. So I'm thinking that this isn't the issue either. Think of all the stuff that you're learning this time around, right? It's not even coding. Okay, I'm going to click OK. I don't think any changes were made, and I know that if I refresh here, this still isn't going to work. All right, the problem is we've run out of time. All right, so this is kind of our goal, and this is exactly why the due dates are what they are. I anticipate this first night is kind of like the first night we do the database stuff. We're just kind of gearing up with the technology and getting ready to work. So if you guys are brave and you go home and you figure this out on your own, kudos to you. But next time that we come back, I'll have a fix for us, and we'll press on to the exercises. You'll see the exercises are not really that difficult. We do actually continue stepping through the chapter, and the reason for that is the chapter work helps us get ready for the actual exercises.
Oh.
And that's not always the case in this book, but in this case it is. So once we can get this working correctly, everything else will kind of fall into place. I do have a couple of other little strategies I'm going to try, but I am going to end this video now because class is 5 minutes past being done. So this video ends here, and we'll pick up right in this spot next week.